Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager for SAGE Methodspace, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Ewa Okla, who was my former doctoral student, and we're going to talk about her research experiences. But first, if you are new to Methodspace, this is a blog community sponsored by SAGE Publishing, and we're interested in everything to do with designing, planning, conducting, analyzing research, writing about it, sharing results in all different kinds of ways. And as you can see at the center of this Venn diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are a brand new researcher or an experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. So why don't you just begin by introducing yourself?
Well, thank you very much for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Dr. Ewa Okla, and I work at MetLife as a quality analyst, and I also am an adjunct instructor at Wilmington University. I focus on classes around business analytics, as well as various human resources classes.
So tell us about your doctoral research, which I think as people hear about it, was quite ahead of its time.
I know, it's so funny that we bring it up because my research was done about 6 years ago now, obviously way before COVID even existed. And my research was on flexible work arrangements and how it really either improves or hinders a person's job satisfaction level. Which now when we look at it, where all of us, well, most of us were able to go remote to work, depending on the position, of course, that you're in. That was like something that was brand new, presented to many companies 3 years ago, where they had to move everything remote, and there was a lot of change that had to be done quickly and effectively to make sure the business kept running. So I felt like I was ahead of the game, and I was like, I knew this research was going to come handy. So I think being able to do the research and really seeing people's feedback, even 6 years ago, you really can see how important it is to a person's employee's job satisfaction level.
So you conducted your entire study online. So tell us a little bit about the approach that you use working with LinkedIn groups.
So I did a lot of it online. Many of you might not be able to see from even the video. I am physically disabled. I have arthrogryposis. I was born with a medical condition where I am in a wheelchair, so I'm dependent on rides and things. So being able to do things online is a lot easier for me. I was able to connect with various groups on LinkedIn around workplace balance and flexibility. And then I actually got all of my participants from 2 specific groups on LinkedIn that focus primarily on these areas. And it was great to see the collaboration that I was able to do with various levels of leadership, whether it was beginner level or up the podium. So really seeing all of their viewpoints. It wasn't I didn't have an age group that I specified or specifically worked on. So that was important too with my research, to really, not hinder my research or skew it in any way by focusing on only one age group. So it was great to do it all online. I was able to have surveys with them online and then speak to them directly too. I had a qualitative research study, so mine focused more on descriptive information rather than quantitative. So that is where I got most of my research from.
So with, as you say, for researchers who have disabilities, or even for participants who have disabilities, being able to do research online, allows for, a lot of options. So for your research participants, they were not aware that you have a disability or that you are in a wheelchair. Was that something that you ever kind of, revealed or that came up as a part of any of your discussions?
Actually, no, because it wasn't Zoom sessions that I had with my participants. It was just strictly over the phone. So like I mentioned, no one really knew because it never came up because it wasn't directly related to my study. So no, it never really came up in any of my conversations with anyone.
So, as you think about, for those who are watching and people who, perhaps are, trying to think about how to proceed as researchers who have disabilities, what would you suggest to them? I guess, one of the things that I wonder is, especially in qualitative research, where we're interacting directly with participants, one of the things, that we talk a lot about, we talk about positionality, whether you're an insider or an outsider. So, depending on what the topic was, I would imagine that you would have approached your methods very differently if you were studying, people with disabilities in the workforce. But since that was not, kind of the phenomenon you were studying, there was not a need for that to come up. But, we talk about positionality, and we also talk about the kind of interviewer effects. What effect do I have, on someone? And, do I, say, show emotion or try to not show emotion? I've read many accounts where people are talking about researchers that you want to say, like, someone might tell you something very shocking, you're dealing with a sensitive issue. Well, you don't want to be, freaking out, because then either that might make them think, oh, well, this is what she wants, this kind of dramatic story. And so they're going to tell you, they're going to skew what they tell you one way, or another. But, I wonder, for people who have disabilities, that for you, we can see you, we don't know. But for some people that wouldn't be something they would be able to avoid disclosing.
Right.
What thoughts do you have that might be helpful to other researchers?
So it's funny that you bring this up, because in one of my courses, I teach training development, and one of the sections I teach is about personal bias. And when I start the conversation about personal bias, people are like, oh, I don't have biases. No. Like, if I see someone, I don't just look at them, and automatically have different biases, right? But then all I do is give my students either a person's name or a picture of them, and I ask them to list different facts about them, what their favorite food is, what their favorite what their occupation is, what is their degree level, how many degrees do they have, do they finish school, things like that. And within 15 minutes, we have a whole story about these 6 names or these 6 pictures, right? And all of a sudden you're like, oh, so you do have biases. How quickly were we able to make up all this information? So where I'm going with this is that everyone has biases, whether you're physically disabled or whether you may have blue hair, or anything that you may see visually or physically on someone. So I think one way to get across these biases or move forward from them is to really, if you're talking about a specific subject, really give examples on the research that you have conducted and really what you're trying to deliver, that your goal isn't to have any kind of skewness, whether it's around one set of people, for example, disabled people versus not disabled people, and really just understanding that and hoping that they understand that your goal is to be a researcher, to get the information that you're trying to really evaluate more and come up with conclusions and further recommendations on. So I think once you kind of have a conversation with someone and really show them the importance and all the research that you've conducted, as long as they're the right participant, then I think they'll move by that. I don't think disabled people should feel like they have to do everything online, or they should be hidden, because that's not how you want to present yourself either. I mean, I wasn't hiding it in any form for my dissertation or anything, but it just didn't come across that I ever met them in person, right? So I wasn't necessarily necessarily trying to hide myself. It was just easier for me to be able to do it all online because of travel restrictions. And also I wanted to have more, not just one demographic. So I wanted to focus on a lot of areas around the states, not just Delaware, where I'm located.
Right. So I think, you make some important points that, I often, talk about it in my books about online research, because I think that, at least when I started writing about this, now people have become more accustomed to it because of the COVID pandemic. But, if you're trying to do anything that someone might perceive as being different, then, it's important to establish your credibility, as a researcher, and to, really explain, the nature of the study, and to build some, the credibility for the work as a whole. And I think, there are a number of ways that you can do that, that would kind of help the person to, focus on the topic at hand, not,
Right.
wondering about your situation, or gee, how could you be a doctoral student if you're someone in a wheelchair, or, whatever questions they might have based on their own, perspectives. And, to me, part of that also comes from, just on a practical level, having more than one interaction with someone. That say, if a researcher is thinking, I'm just going to, schedule the interview, go in, do the interview, collect all my data, and bye, I'm done, versus feeling like, I need to cultivate this relationship, and really be able to take the time, which, of course, is part of the informed part of informed consent, take the time to introduce myself as a researcher, especially as a new researcher or a student researcher, and to, point to, I'm studying at this university, or I'm studying with this dissertation supervisor, who might be someone who's published and known, whatever kind of factors would help someone to see, the importance of what you're doing, and, not be distracted by, some of those other issues.
I agree. Completely agree with that. I think building that credibility is very important. It's not going to be a one and done item. That's not really the research you probably want to do, especially with a qualitative research. I know for a fact, when I was doing my research, I met with each person at least 3 times, first for the informed consent piece, as you mentioned, second for the initial questions that I had, and then a third time to review, kind of take a step back, review their responses originally, and then from that, ask any additional questions I had, or if they had any additional questions around my research, like, because they were able to then understand more of the questions that I had for them, take the time to answer any questions they had too. So it was a threefold project for each person. So like you mentioned, it definitely wasn't like, oh, today's my half an hour, that's it, you'll never hear from me again. And I actually still have connections with a lot of my participants through LinkedIn. So yeah.
Right. In terms of using the technology, what kinds of adaptive technologies do you find useful that especially for researchers who might be just getting started, may or may not be familiar with?
That's a great question. I don't use many of like the adaptive equipments that like voice to recognition or things like that. I'm able to type with using a sling. So I feel like if I type things out, my responses or things like that, that it helps me better remember the information and then see like what else, where I may have gaps. I did use a software, now I can't remember what it was called, but a transcriber. So for the like the recorded calls that I had, I did have a transcriber for that, because obviously each call would be like an hour long. I don't want to really type it all out if not necessary.
Right.
So, but I can't remember what it was called off the top of my head right now. I remember it was very helpful. And then I also used another software where it picked up on keywords or trends across all my responses. So that was also very helpful.
Okay. So are there any other tips that you would offer to, perhaps a doctoral student or new researcher who is, trying to build their confidence to interact with participants?
So I would say well, first is don't give up, because the research stage, I feel like the dissertation piece was the hardest part of schooling. I know having a great mentor like you, Dr. Salmons, was the key for me to be successful. There's many times I was like, I can't do this anymore, So I guess the first thing is to not give up, and don't get discouraged if people say they don't want to participate, because you have to see it from their side too. They might not have the time to participate or really have the knowledge or like qualities that you're looking for. So don't get discouraged, because I felt at first when I couldn't really find participants, I was like, oh my gosh, my study isn't really useful. Automatically you think the worst, right? So the first one would be not to give up and don't feel discouraged. Keep pushing through and working with your mentor or whoever is your mentor throughout the process, because I think that's what's really going to help you go from step one to step two. Without that kind of mentorship or understanding, it would be very difficult. So make sure you have a great mentor along the way.
So I don't know whether you participated or took advantage of any of the kind of Americans for Disability Act kind of options or programs or services that were available. But, I think for a lot of people, they might find that, maybe they're, whether their dissertation supervisor is kind of adequately supportive, that there may be other places within their universities they can turn on other, peer support as well. Did you find any of that? I mean, I don't know whether, especially being in an online doctoral program, there's not really that many opportunities to necessarily, like, say, find people you're reading with coffee, to just be able to let your hair down and, scream and yell about the things that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Actually, so a few of my peers from my undergraduate and graduate studies before I went to the online doctoral program also went to the same program. So it was kind of like we were just working on two different areas, like two different majors, but we were able to like talk to each other like, oh, this is the part I'm at the dissertation, or this is where I am in my curriculum, or this is, like where I am with the test that needs to be done, things like that. But it wasn't necessarily like, since it's an online school that I went to, it was kind of difficult to, like you said, have like the hands-on conversations with people. But we did have colloquiums, so those were helpful, where we had to attend them once a year, and then we could really meet with our mentors and our students, our peers that we've been working through in our classes for the coursework stages of our doctoral program. So I think those really helped. I think that's where I met a lot of my peers, because other than that, everyone is kind of like a name. And yes, you work with people on discussion boards and things like that, but getting that face-to-face contact really helps build relationships. So I really appreciated having those colloquiums.
Right, the residency component that at least some online programs offer. And, certainly for people who are at an on-ground university, they would, perhaps have a few more opportunities in that regard.
Right.
Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I just think it was a great time in my life. It was stressful. I'm sure people that are going through it are thinking, man, there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but there is. And then all the benefits for having is great. I love to be able to teach now and to provide the mentorships that I had along the way. And so really just focusing on getting to that light at the end of the tunnel. Not giving up and making sure you're asking for help when you need it. That's why we have mentors. That's why we have different professors along the way. So I think that's very important to know. And I'm glad that I had a great foundation and mentorship around in my corner, because like I said, if I didn't, I wouldn't be where I am today. So
right. And it's exciting to see that you've been able to move ahead in your career and then also teach as an adjunct professor. So you've been able to stay engaged in the field that you did your research in.
yes.
All righty. Well, thank you for talking with me, and I certainly wish you the best as you continue to develop and give back. I think it's great that you've been able to be so involved, and I'm sure that your students really appreciate what the experience that you're able to bring to them.
Thank you so much for having me again. I really appreciate it.